okay, well, that's a really long story, so we'll see. So I decided to be a solicitor when I was about 14. I had quite a complicated and chaotic childhood. I ended up accidentally at a open day at a college with a law session. It was a session where they talked about, here's some circumstances, you're the magistrate, how much you're going to fine this person. And I was within about £20 or something of the actual decision. And I thought, maybe there's something in this, structure, rules, fairness. I really was attracted to it. Also, I felt it was a really secure job. I didn't know any solicitors. I didn't know any professional services people, actually. My family were all in social work and social care. And so, yeah, I just said at 14, I'm going to be a solicitor, set my path. It was really tough, though. I struggled through my GCSEs, I struggled through my A-levels, I struggled through my law degree. I spent every day in the library and still came out with a 2-2, which to try and get into law back in the 90s was pretty, disastrous, if I'm honest. And I secured a local training contract, went off to do my, postgraduate law course you need to do. And 3 weeks before the end of that, I contacted the firm. They were just up the road from me. They said, very sorry, Amy, we're keeping our trainee when he qualifies, and so we don't have a place for you. And so I had to, just left college, all of the debt, no job. And so I took a job as a paralegal in a possibly, I think, the worst firm in Manchester at the time.
We won't name them.
No, we won't name them. It doesn't exist anymore, in fairness. But the learning I got from working in that environment really did set the course for how I got to where I got to. And it was everything I don't want to have in a working environment. It was psychologically unsafe. It was high pressure. It was sometimes verbally and emotionally abusive. And there was just, people felt that they didn't have any choice. And I certainly felt I didn't have any choice because I had that promise of this training contract. So you put up with anything, really. Anyway, I went from there. I got a job in possibly the best firm in Manchester for doing what I do post-qualification. I used to be a personal injury lawyer. And I went to the most prestigious firm in Manchester, if not the country at the time. And mainly they gave me a job, not because of my 2-2 from a former polytechnic, but because I'd lasted 3 years working for this guy and everybody knew how tough that was. In personal injury, most people had been through the door of the firm I used to work at and then had kind of left relatively quickly, and I'd stuck it out for 3 years. So my head of department at the time, that's all she needed to know, that I'd survived a training contract there, and so signed me up.
It's later on we're going to talk a bit about some of the other things you faced, challenges you faced, and I'm just thinking, listening to you saying this, that perhaps now you're much better able to explain why you struggled in the learning phase, and yet you've triumphed in the doing phase.
Yeah. When I did my postgraduate course, which was actually moving away from the academic law and into the practical law, I absolutely excelled at that. From really scraping, right on the boundary of grades that I needed to suddenly going to, distinctions in real practical stuff, conveyancing, form filling, and being able to apply the law to a practical situation is where I excelled. And then one of the things that the skills that I developed when I was in that training contract was I had an impossible job and I had to figure out how to make it work to survive. The first exposure to an impossible job was about 2 years in, still a trainee solicitor, was given 4 days notice to go and run a litigation desk of 600 files. I'd had very little training in the areas of law. And suddenly I was told, on Monday, you're going to report to this office. You're going to spend 4 days with the guy that runs the desk there to get a handover. He's leaving it was Easter. He's leaving on on the Thursday before Good Friday, and you're taking over on the Monday after Easter Monday. And I went, okay. And no idea what I was doing. Absolutely no idea what I was doing. No support, no supervisor. And that, like, you can't do that. It's against the rules.
Right.
But how am I going to make it work? And he was saying, well, you need to open this many files. You need to do this much billing. And in 6 months, I'd learned everything. I'd introduced processes. I'd trained my support staff to be able to do the parts of my role that didn't need me to do it as a lawyer. They were administrative, and so I made the process efficient. Then 6 months later, he rang me up and he said, Amy, you're coming back to the head office. You're bringing all your filing cabinets, and now you're inheriting another 2,000 files because the only solicitor in the place has just walked out in the contentious work part. And so I went, okay. And off I went to back to the Hyde office where I'd started. I'd qualified by this point. I was a solicitor. Well, I wasn't on the roll, actually. I'd finished my training contract, but he was so disorganised with the paperwork. But, you know, I felt I'd had 6 months running my own desk. But I inherited 5 secretaries, 2 trainee solicitors. I brought my own secretary with me from where I'd been. And we had 2,000 clients wanting support on top of my 600. And this was way before we had paralegals. In those days, you had the lawyers and you had a secretary, and the secretary just reacted to the dictation that the lawyer gave them. There wasn't a use of precedent. There wasn't a use of, there was no encouraging the support staff to use any initiative. They didn't think that the support staff were capable. And I'm sat there with this massive challenge going, well, what am I going to do about this? So what I did was basically went through with the 5 ladies that I had and said, that's your bit of the alphabet, that's your bit. And I split the alphabet up between them. And I said, listen, here's the process. There are a few steps that take place in a personal injury case before it needs a lawyer looking at it. So I'm going to train you how to do that. I'm going to give you all the precedent letters, and you ladies are going to follow that process.
So you were, almost without realizing it, you were way ahead of where the whole legal profession was going to go.
Absolutely. When I went to the big firm, they're all still dictating. I'm used to running 2,600 caseload, obviously with support and not on my own. I go to the big firm, start taking on cases. I've got my original secretary with me who we'd worked in this partnership where she did so much of it. I did a bit of it. We then processized, if that's a word, further what we did. So we did car accidents. There's only 4 ways really to have a car accident in terms of the particulars of claim that you would file at the court. So I just wrote all 4 of those, and I would come out and I'd interview the client. I'd get all the relevant information. I'd fill a form in that then she could slot the answers to that into a statement. And then I would say it's particulars of claim C or it's letter of claim B. And she would just write it. Create that for me. So I was doing twice as much work as everybody else because everybody else was still coming off the phone, dictating longhand their statement from the conversation, because in those days you used to get paid by how much work you'd done. But for me, I was about, well, the real money comes when you get to the settlement. So dragging it out didn't make any sense